Read it with sorrow, and you will feel hate. Read it with anger, and you will feel vengeful. Read it with paranoia, and you will feel confusion. Read it with empathy, and you will feel compassion. Read it with love, and you will feel flattery. Read it with hope, and you will feel positive. Read it with humor, and you will feel joy. Read it without bias, and you will feel peace. Do not read it at all, and you will not feel a thing. The complexity of confirmation bias arises partly from the fact that it is impossible to overcome it without an awareness of the concept. Even when shown evidence to contradict a biased view, we may still interpret it in a manner that reinforces our current perspective. When confronted with evidence that contradicts our beliefs, our minds do not instinctively acknowledge the discrepancy and adjust accordingly. Instead, we reinterpret the information to align with our pre-existing views, reinforcing our position rather than reconsidering it. A well-known study from Stanford illustrates this phenomenon. Researchers divided participants into two groups, one in favor of capital punishment and one opposed. Both groups were presented with the same two fictional studies, one supporting and one challenging their stance. Despite receiving identical information, participants selectively accepted the evidence that confirmed their beliefs while dismissing the rest. Rather than prompting reflection, the study only strengthened their original positions. This 1979 Stanford experiment on confirmation bias by Charles G. Lord, Lee Ross, and Mark R. Lepper resulted in a paper titled Biased Assimilation and Attitude Polarization: The Effects of Prior Theories on Subsequently Considered Evidence, which was published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology that same year. This study showed confirmation bias in action. It distorts our perception, giving us the illusion of objectivity while we unconsciously filter information to suit our narrative. Even when presented with empirical data, we find ways to interpret it in our favor. As C.S. Lewis observed, we are what we believe we are. But in many ways, the world we perceive is also shaped by what we choose to believe. Confirmation bias is our brain's tendency to seek out, interpret, and remember information that supports what we already believe. It's not something we do on purpose, it just happens. This can make us ignore critical information, especially when the topic is something personal or high stakes. The danger? It makes us overconfident in false beliefs because we've surrounded ourselves with evidence that backs them up while conveniently overlooking anything that challenges them. This can lead to poor decisions, missed warning signs, and, in extreme cases, complete delusion. Our brains didn't evolve for perfect rationality. They evolved for survival. Early humans who stuck with their existing beliefs were more likely to make quick decisions and avoid danger. If an ancestor saw rustling in the grass and assumed it was a predator, their instinct to flee, even if it was just the wind, helped them survive. Over time, this preference for sticking to pre-existing beliefs became hardwired, even when the stakes aren't life or death. Confirmation bias isn't just about information processing, it's deeply tied to emotion. Studies using brain scans have shown that when people encounter contradictory evidence, their brain's pain and threat centers, the amygdala and insular cortex, activate. It's as if their identity is under attack. Meanwhile, when people find information that confirms their beliefs, the brain's reward centers, like the striatum, light up. In other words, believing what we already know feels good, literally. Confirmation bias is amplified by social environments. We naturally gravitate toward people who share our views, reinforcing our biases. Psychologists call this group polarization. When like-minded people discuss an issue, they don't just affirm their beliefs, they become even more extreme. This is why cults, political ideologies, and conspiracy theories gain such a powerful hold over people. One of the most counterintuitive aspects of confirmation bias is the backfire effect. When people are presented with strong evidence against their beliefs, they don't necessarily change their minds. Instead, they dig in deeper. A study from Nyhan and Reifler in 2006 found that when people with strong political beliefs were shown corrections to misinformation, they often became more entrenched in their original beliefs. When people are tired, stressed, or overloaded with information, they rely on mental shortcuts, also called heuristics, more than ever. Confirmation bias is one such shortcut. It allows us to quickly sort through vast amounts of information without questioning everything. This is why high-stress environments, like cults or crisis situations, make people more susceptible to bias. Confirmation bias is a key factor in what's called a black swan event. A black swan event is something unexpected, something nobody saw coming, until it happens. And then suddenly, in hindsight, everyone acts like it was obvious all along. The term comes from ancient Rome. The poet Juvenal used it to describe something impossible, since, at the time, everyone knew all swans were white. That assumption held for centuries. Then in 1697, European explorers in Australia found actual black swans. And just like that, the belief crumbled. That's the power of a single piece of contradictory evidence. One black swan destroyed the assumption that all swans were white. And yet, humans continue to fall into the same trap, assuming that just because something hasn't happened or we haven't seen it, it can't be real. What's actually happening in the brain? Selective attention and perception. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making, filters out contradicting information. Memory and recall. The hippocampus stores memories in a way that favors our existing beliefs. Cognitive dissonance reduction. When faced with contradictory evidence, the amygdala kicks in, making us feel uncomfortable. The prefrontal cortex steps in to rationalize the contradiction and reduce that discomfort. reinforcement, and habit. The more we engage in confirmation bias, the stronger the neural pathways become, making it harder to break out of the pattern. This is why getting out of a cult or any strongly held belief system is so difficult. The brain is wired to resist change. If one is in a cult or controlled group of any kind, eventually they no longer seek out the contradictory information. In the grand tapestry of human condition, our minds are both marvelously creative and curiously fallible. Take the black swan as a metaphor, a bird once thought to be non-existent until discovered, forever changing our understanding of the natural world. Just as early ornithologists were certain all swans were white, our brains often cling to preconceived notions through the lens of confirmation bias. We seek out information that reassures us, like the comforting whiteness of swans we've always known, and often reject the black swans that challenge our beliefs. This bias plays a particularly powerful role in the world of cults. Within these insular communities, the same psychological forces that led us to overlook black swans can foster unwavering loyalty to charismatic leaders and implausible doctrines. Members may selectively attend to the leader's miracles, reinterpret failures as tests of faith, and cling to the shared identity that the cult provides, all while dismissing mounting evidence of deception and harm. So, how does one combat confirmation bias? Since breaking free from confirmation bias is so difficult, here are some ways to counter it. Actively seeking out opposing viewpoints, like reading sources you normally disagree with. Engaging in Socratic questioning, asking yourself why you believe what you believe. Practicing intellectual humility, accepting that you might be wrong, and being mindful of emotional reactions. When you feel defensive, pause and reflect. In essence, both the unnoticed black swan and the unwavering cult member reveal the profound grip of confirmation bias. They serve as stark reminders of the necessity of intellectual humility, the willingness to challenge our own beliefs, scrutinize our assumptions, and engage with perspectives that unsettle us. Only by confronting these biases head-on can we escape the narrow confines of distorted thinking and grasp reality in its entirety. No matter how unsettling or unexpected it may be.